So if you talk about this RC expire, your obstructive lungs are going to have a higher RC, a longer time to exhale, and that's good because we want to give them more time to get that stuff out. But your ARDS restrictive patients is going to have a decreased expiratory time. But normal is 0.4 to 0.5, so we're a little low here. Excuse me, 0.5 to 0.7 is normal. So we have, 0.4 to 0.6 would be what you would see in ARDS. So if we do this here, because traditionally with the COPD asthma patient, we're going to set it about 90% and see how that changes. We go to controls. And let's change that down back to 25%, I believe. See how this P ramp is shorter? It's giving all that air a little bit faster. It's kind of something you ought to probably consider changing immediately. Alright, so we'll go back to talking about this real quick. You can see we changed a little bit, not a lot. If we're talking about the inspiratory, resistance inspiratory and compliance static, normal compliance is going to give you a value of about 50 to 60 on compliance. So as you can see here, our compliance is 25. That's really stiff. That's decreased compliance. But I also have this thing stretched out about as much as it'll stretch out. So that makes sense that we don't have a lot of compliance because it's really stiff. And then we talk about resistance. Normal resistance is 10 to 15. And this is our chart we probably ought to put with the vent so we can get it to understand. But normal resistance is 10 to 15. Obstructive patients, so asthma, COPD, you'll get 10 to 15. They'll have normal resistance. Whereas your ARDS or your lung protective restrictive patients will have an increased resistance, which makes sense. They're about 15 to 30. So right now, we have a lot of resistance. Which I'm not surprised, again, because we have this big giant 702, or this small 702 tube on this big giant tube. So the next thing we'll talk about, we talked about the alarms, we talked about the controls and making changes, we talked about getting your P-plat measurement, but again, they're almost always going to be close to that. So this tells you, if you want to click on your screen, it gives you a little information too. So on your flow chart here, this window is 12 seconds, and it's got numbers down here to help you see it, but so you wanted to, now you see, I didn't confirm it. Might not be able to change it either. I'm not going to change it because then I'll forget to change it back and be in trouble. So you can't change this. This is going to be what you always get. But like here, you can change between what you want. This has got a flow volume waveform. So this is a very similar presentation to this, except for now you're seeing a flow waveform based upon mLs versus pressures of centimeter of water. So a lot of people just like the flow. It tells you what's going in and what's going out. So if you wanted to have this, you can see that I've got this much air going in, this much air going out, and it kind of tells you this is flow in liters per minute. So I got roughly a little over 50 going in and a little less than 50 going out. So that kind of makes sense looking at our resistance and compliance, that we have a little bit of air left in this. As you can see, it stays blown up. You can also just turn it off, but it's not advisable because you want to be able to see what you can see. I'm going to go back to the flow. You can get some trends for your peaks and give you some, tells you what you've been trending at your peep. So right here, been trending my peep of 11, and it's color coded to let you know. Green. And this is over, 1 hour, 6 hours, whatever it is. Hopefully you never have to use the 6-hour one, because that would suck. But so we're going to go back. Then you can go to loops. Loops is kind of a fun one. Volume and flow. It gives you now obviously it makes sense because you're making a loop. So you have this loop coming in. So this is inhalation, exhalation, and you go back to 0. It's kind of funny that something that like a third grader drew on, actually something that you can see. Same with pressure. I don't know too many people that use loops, but if that's your jam, go for it. Then the graphics, and we talked about waveforms, which is where we started. So, I don't know, you can use everything. These are so many tools for you to use, so you find out what works for you. But as a general rule, people are either going to use graphics or they're going to use the waveform. So, the dynamic lung. This has got a lot of valuable information. Okay, so as you can see this lung right here, I don't know how you can see, you'll have to see it when we do some training on it, but you can see two things. You can see colors of the airway, and you can see shape of the lung. If you have rounded lungs, now these are squared off, right? And they're smaller. So as you're talking about, tells you these informations here, so your RNs, the size of your lungs is going to be based upon your compliance. And as we talked about, we have a compliance of 23, which that means that they are very stiff. And so you have small lungs, and you have squared lungs. If you have this stiff lung, these decreased compliance, you're going to have this stiffness, where it is in between kind of moderate numbers. Sorry. See, disconnected. Now I hooked them back on just because I wanted to see. 1-minute volume, now you're good to go. That's going to give it test breaths, everything's going to be good to go. It's really hard to do on this patient's lungs, but and if you see right here, this is an actual picture of a diaphragm, so it's telling you the patient's trying to take a breath. As you can see right there, you see a little diaphragm picture. And then the other thing I want to talk about on the dynamic lung is colors. If you have normal resistance, this airway tree, bronchial tree that you see in here, will be blue. Now we have moderate resistance here, so it's a little peach color, and if it was really, really bad, resistance, it would be red. Then the other thing we can do is the ASV graph. This is a cool little tool. So when the breath is, or when the vent is sending in its information, its test breaths at the very beginning, it's doing all its calculations, determining what is best, and then it comes back and you can see this graph. This graph is telling you what is best for the patient. And so this graph itself on the x-axis, y-axis, so breaths on the x, tidal volume on the y, is going to give you this whole deal. Now, you see this box here. This is telling you what the vent sees it can do and the changes that you can potentially make. So if you have a very wide graph, then it's saying that you got a lot of room that you can make manipulations and still be safe depending on the other changes you make. And so if you have a lot of, hopefully you're going to have a big and tall box, but this is a long box, so you have some room you can make for your respiratory rate, but you don't have a lot of room you can do for tidal volume. And then it does its curve, and so your goal is if they're really clamped down, they're really tight, they're non-compliant, they're very stiff, you'll have a very small box each way. This one's giving you a lot of room, and so the ventilator in ASV mode is going to give ventilations based upon this graph, on what it sees. And so you can see there, I made a big giant change, so I'm giving a ton of oxygen. This is what the vent sees is best for this patient. Didn't really change the dynamics much, but it's going to start giving breaths based upon the way this graph goes. So it's giving high minute volume, and that makes sense because I increased the oxygen by 85%. So it decreased my tidal volume that it was giving. Excuse me, it increased its tidal volume, and it increased its respiratory rate. And we went from 6 to 7 liters to 13 liters. So that all makes sense. It just means, you can see right here, it just means that we're giving more of something. So if I did the opposite, I went down to 80, 70, let's go 70%, just see what happens. Well, now the vent's done its calculations, decided that this is what's best, and so it's going to adjust. The reason I show you this is that you can manipulate this box, and as you use it more, you'll understand how to make changes to get this. But what I wanted to show you was percent minute volume. So COPD asthma obstructive patient, you use lower minute volumes, and as you can see, it lowered my tidal volume, lowered my respiratory rate, because the goal for them is to exhale. And so we don't need as much oxygen per se. We just need them more time to ventilate. So it did its calculation. Now look how I did changed PEEP there, and it changed my ability to give tidal volumes. Well, I increased the residual air in the lung at expiratory. So that makes sense that we're going to be able to give less tidal volume because there's more pressure in the lungs. Whereas if I just took all the PEEP off, you can see that now my box changed going vertically. So I have more room because there's to give breaths, because there's not as much pressure being held in the lungs at the end exhalation. We go to controls here. Flow trigger. Oh, that's what I'm jacking. Let's make this faster. Let's go to 50. See what happens. So see, now it changed everything again. It doesn't allow me to give as much volume again because I'm giving more air faster. I changed my rise time or my P ramp time. So again, that was the number, how fast air is going in. Well, you gotta remember, the faster you give something, the more the pressure is going to be. And so I increased how fast I'm giving the oxygen, and so you're going to have higher pressures. I go back to normal. got the ETS. So again, confirm. Right, let's go see what we got now. So that's a little bit on what we got going on here. This AC Graph's a cool tool if you understand how to use it. You can guide your changes and see, but a lot of the times the vent is going to do its calculations and give breaths accordingly. Now this is an ASV graph, so you're only going to see it in ASV, but you can do vent status. I don't really know much about that. I don't use it in the dynamic lung. So let's crank this baby up. See what happens if we do this. I'm not going to be able to. I'm not very happy. I got it held all the way shut. So this would be like synonymous to somebody who is just so stiff that they can't give air in. This is what it's going to do. Then it'll vent pressure limitation, high frequency because it's trying to give breaths because it's not meeting the demand. And then eventually it's going to say demands of the ventilator can't be met. So you give a breathing treatment. Now everything's going back to normal. So I did that just to show you, like, the vent is doing all these calculations on its own. And it knows how much minute volume it wants to give, and so it's going to adjust accordingly. As you can see, it's going back down. It was up into the 40s, you know, somebody who's stiff, needs a breathing treatment, whatever. And then you give them the breathing treatment, they open back up, and the vent automatically adjusts. And as you've seen, you can also click on this if you want. Again, say you want to, but yeah, this is a great vent. It's going to provide us some different tool that we have. I don't know that it's any better or any worse. It's really dependent on the person using it. I still have some trouble every once in a while with ASV just because I don't totally get all the fine nuances, so I'm learning about it every day. But it's going to be a great tool. We're going to get, I believe, some more training from one of the Hamilton educators, and then Dr. Hall, of course, uses this as a Buchanan County too, so he's always a great option to call. So this is my introductory video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to holler. If I forgot anything, I apologize. And I look forward to getting this in operation. It's going to be a great tool for us. So have a good day.